All right, are you good to go? Um, yeah, I think the topic is very interesting. It's called Elegance and Enigma of Software Architecture. And interestingly, we have very less interest on this topic in general. And we are going to walk you through why. And I'm going to also try to decompose some bit of it so it makes sense for most of us. So my name is Sagar Biswas. In short, Sagar. That's easy to pronounce for everybody. So I have 17 years of experience in engineering and technical leadership. I have been managing 10 plus airlines architecture in Amadeus. Yeah, that's pretty much about me. Now, a question to all of you. Raise your hand if you have never traveled in air. That's nice. So in Amadeus, we have 400 plus airlines. We have 1 million plus hotel properties, 185 airports operators, 240 tour operators, 81 car providers, and 21 insurance providers. And this is not just the numbers. We have many more. That's something powered by our softwares. And we are managing roughly 1 million plus transactions per second. And this number is very close to, by the way, Google, what Google manages today. Now, we have offices across the world, and of course, we have it in Istanbul. So with that, let's come back to a small story. During the lockdown, when there was no place to go, so my daughter and I often used to go to the rooftop and simply looking at the sky, the night sky, probably stargazing. One such day, my daughter broke the silence, and she asked me a question. That is, what's the color of the sky? Who thinks it's blue? Raise your hand. Okay. I was perplexed when my daughter asked me these questions, and I was trying to think because in the night when I look up, I can't see it's blue. And the answer is it depends. It depends at what time of the day you are looking at the sky or from where you are seeing the sky. So the perspective here is we often come up with some conclusion without knowing the real context behind it. In software architecture, the most used phrase is also, it depends. And the reason being, whenever you ask an architect, okay, this is a good solution, bad solution, should I do this, should I do that? And you probably get this answer, it depends. The reason being, unless we understand each and every parameters, understand the context, everything is always depends. Now this software architecture, if we look at that, it is a very recent phenomena in software industries. Hello. Thank you. Now, this is a recent phenomena in the software industry. Forget about software industry. The large population today, even in the world, they believe there is no need of an architect. And trust me, if you look around, you can get a lot of proof. What do you see? There can be buildings probably on a stick. There can be staircase directly bumping a pillar. There can be a very interesting staircase, but I do not know if you can see it here. I'm not sure who's gonna try this joyride. So let's take another example. So this is probably easy to understand for all of us. We have a login screen where you need to pass the username and password. And once you successfully log in, the profile information needs to be fetched from the profile database and pass it back to the calling system. Number one, question is that, what's the amount of data you're gonna pass it back? We all know making a query to database how heavy it is. And we all know we should reduce the number of query execution on a database. So if you ask, probably a developer might say, okay, send it everything. So it is there in the calling system. Let them decide what they need to do. But hang on a second. How about the bandwidth? Is it something also giving a hint of something like a stamp coupling? That means I have probably 100 fields in the database. I pass it back to the front end or the calling application, but I might end up using one or two. And that's exactly the point here. In architecture, everything is a trade-off. Now, once we know that in software architecture, everything is a trade-off, the perspective is that how can I draw these trade-offs? How can you find what's the right trade-off? And that's why it is important for us to understand how an architect thinks. And this is true, by the way, irrespective of all of our roles. Be it a software developer, quality engineer, product definition analyst, any profile. Forget about that. Even if you are not an engineer, I think it is extremely important for us to understand that what it takes to really weigh between two different solutions in your life, how to understand the trade-offs. Now, coming back to the software part of it. So the way we generally get the requirements, the business gives us requirements, and those are called business drivers. And it can be something like time to market. I want a system which has a great time to market. I want a system which has capabilities of expansion or pivot. I want to make my user satisfaction score high, and I also want to have competitive advantage. Does any of them look like a technical thing? The answer is no. Now, the interesting part, all of them fit together if we just pay attention to them. Time to market, it is agility, deployability, testability. Expansion or pivot, it is interoperability, scalability, user satisfaction, performance, agility, ability, security, and so on. The job of an architect is to understand these business drivers and derive them into the architectural characteristics. That's the first perspective. The second one is having a breadth of knowledge. Now, if you look at this triangle, there are three parts. The first one is stuff that you know, which is your technical depth. The second part is that stuff that you know that you do not know. And the last part is the stuff that we do not know that you do not know. Now, let's go back to the first triangle, the topmost one, which is our technical depth. Now, interestingly, this is something, once you acquire this technical depth, it is also our responsibility to maintain it. And trust me, it takes a lot of time. And how many hours do we have in a day? 24 hours, and we also need to do a lot of things other than software development. So the way it changes is something like this for a profile like architect. So they need to sacrifice some of their technical depth to increase their breadth of knowledge. And this breadth of knowledge is extremely important to understand a perspective that if I take solution A or if I take solution B, what are the benefits and drawbacks if we have taken the solution A or if we have taken the solution B. Now, once we have broadened this knowledge, and there are, by the way, many ways to do it. I think the way I do it, generally, I watch a lot of YouTube videos. I have subscription to multiple different mail chains, and that gives me some keywords. It's not like I read all of them. It's something like that. If some words really grab my attention, I just Google around it and know that what it is. And all of this become an index in my brain. So tomorrow, if something I find contextual, I probably go back and see what it is or what it was, and that helps. Now, we need to really balance the trade-off, right? Now, the way you can do that is something like this. We need to understand the context. One, we need to understand understand how to reconcile them, the context. You also need to analyze them in deep to find out the patterns and find out what it makes to do a balancing. So let's look at this. This is our business drivers, that is user satisfaction. Now we all know, we learned now that it means from an architecture perspective, performance, availability, and security. Now, if we have to design something like this, we'll be thinking about a system which is faster to response, fault tolerant, and also very secure. We do not want any data loss, right? Now, pay attention to these two, security and performance. Security means a lot of encryption and decryption, and trust me, they are very, very expensive. Performance, if the performance is low, probably user will not even interact with the system. So here, we need to really do a trade-off between performance and security, which brings to the second takeaway, that we need to translate the business drivers. We need to analyze the system, and to do that, we need to broaden our knowledge. And finally, we need to balance the trade-offs. Now that we know how probably architects think in a very simple way, it's not the end, by the way. The world is much more complex than what you think. There are different perspectives that exist in our world. The first being technology. And I think this is most obvious one. All of us know about it. Now, what does technology do? Technology make something possible which was impossible yesterday, right? And there are ample examples. So over here, if you see, I have put a quantum computers picture, right? There is another one today. Abhirami was talking about probably AI, Gen AI, a lot of talks on that as well. Now, let's stick to these quantum computers. So how many of you have cars or you know how to drive the cars? Raise your hand. So what if I tell you that take your car, dive into a sea, find out what's happening under the sea? Can you do that? You can't do that. And that is where the quantum computer comes in the picture, because the computers that we all use are based on binary systems, 0 or 1. Right? But in our reality, the options are much more than that. It's not always yes or no, right? And that's where the quantum computer comes, which narrates the nature close to minute fractions, and that's how they compute it. And now just imagine the amount of possibility it will bring tomorrow. Now, the technology is important, we all know, but without having the perspective of business, we cannot tie the technology, right? We need to know at what context. So tech enables, but business always drives. Do you know about this one? The plane here? What it calls, anybody? Okay, it is Concorde, okay. Now, some data. Back in the days when Concorde was operational, the time it is to take to fly from London to New York was about 3 hours. Today, how much time it takes? Roughly 7 hours. So what happened to Concorde? It's an engineering masterpiece. It probably came ahead of time. But the perspective was that it had a lot of negatives as well. The operability was very high, the cost of operating these carriers. The maintainability also very high, and there was not enough possibility to make a business case. We tried and we failed. Okay, and that's why it's very interesting that we understand the business context. Now think about today, almost everyone, be it a technical or non-technical person, talking about AI and Gen AI, two different topics. But it is there from technology perspective. But how many of such companies today can actually make a viable business model out of AI and Gen AI? We all are struggling. We are all trying to find the meaningful business model out of it. Now, the third most important perspective is people. Now, people is also very interesting because we need to really know how they move. We all believe that we are data-driven, but actually we are emotional-driven. Even if we have the data, we choose something what is more close to our heart. And that's why it is very difficult to make people move. And why it is important, if you have the business, if you have the technology, but who is going to build it? Who is going to use it? And who is going to fund it? And that's why the role of also a person like architect, it's important to constantly communicate with different stakeholders and pass the right message to them. So the third takeaway is connecting the dots between people, business, and technology. Now that you understand different perspectives, so let's look at an example, which is modularity. So how many of you heard of architectural pattern, very popular one called monolith? Raise your hand, right? So, and today the way we look at the monolith is that it's a dinosaur. I'm not sure why it even existed. So think about something like this. The monolithic non-layered architecture is if it is the extreme left end, right? Where the agility is extremely low. At the rightmost end, probably we'll be having microservices architecture, right? Now, to reach to the right is extremely expensive. That's something people do not talk about it. So we all know microservices are good, but we do not know what additional cost and pain it brings on the table. So that's a different topic altogether. But from left to right, if you have to travel, the way it has been traveled, probably the simple way, if I describe it, it is based on the modularity. With time, the modularity has increased, right? Now, let's take an example. Say there's a ABC Airlines, and they want to revamp their website for better user satisfaction. There are millions of users going to use this website. There are two different type of personas, travelers and travel agent. There are also some future requirements, like in future, they would like to have a loyalty program launched. They would like to have a mobile application. And from an organization perspective, they are gonna have a new department who gonna do many marketing testing, right? Now from this requirement, the way an architect thinks is something like this. They pick up the keywords, okay? So if you look at that, number one, user satisfaction, millions of users, two types of users, new loyalty program, mobile app, and new department. So all are the fast way to understand what we should do. Now, all of them can be business drivers, and all of them makes a lot of sense when you break it down to architectural characteristics. Okay, so now let's look at the fast part. So this is probably the current state when we get this problem statement. We have the website, we have a backend at the back connecting to a database, and in between, so we have a content delivery network or say web application firewall. So we heard about this two different users, travel agent and traveler booking. So this tells us we can probably think about a modularity based on the domains, business domains, and that exactly you can do. We can break it into two different domains, right? From there, if we go to the next one, which talks about introducing two different backend for frontend, the perspective here is something like this. We cannot break this big backend in a day. To do that, we need to probably take help of something like a strangler pattern. That's why we need to introduce a layer in between, and that might send the tailored response back to the calling systems, the domains. Okay, now let's just expand it. So digital marketing and the mobile app. We can have a mobile app that can be a new different domains, not a problem. We can also split the most hot pages, homepage and SEO pages. That's where the marketing team always play around. If we keep them together with your transactional pages, it's a problem. And then you can also think about a payment, which is your security part of it. Split that up. Now, if we do that, it's about the different domains. You need to also break the application back into your backend. That's why it is coming like we split the application into shopping, booking, payment, and loyalty. Now, if you look at the shopping, the reason shopping is split from the booking because the traffic comes to shopping is much, much more higher and much, much more bursty in nature than the booking. So if we break it into modules, now it can be a macro level or it can be a micro level as well, but modules are very important. And once you do that, that means you can independently deploy a shopping application. So if you need to scale, you can immediately scale that. Now, with this, if you just put orchestration in between and the choreographer in between, this becomes your service-oriented architecture, right? Now, one day, if we also able to make it more granular, each of the services more granular, and owning their own data, we can also make a microservice, right? The point is, it takes time. It is a journey. So think about a startup, like a startup, when they're starting with an application, they do not know how it will scale. The very first day, if they're thinking, okay, I'll build a microservices, they're immediately increasing their cost. So it's a journey. So monolithic are not really bad. It can possibly good when you start something, bootstrap something for a small purpose, and then expand it. Expand it, understand all these business drivers, the trade-offs, and see at what point of time you need to expand your architecture. So all this looks really nice. The question is that where is the elegance and the enigma part of it? So again, this is something my friend Venkat today morning touched upon about simplicity. So I have a different quote. So it said, simple can be harder. And we need to really work hard to think clean, to make things simple. And this is even more interesting when you think about that it's not only one person working, a team of people or multiple teams working together. They might have different definitions of a single thing in a different way. The way it works, I just want you to imagine something like this. See this whole room, right? All of us. We need to go to north. And we are walking. How do you find where is north? We look at the North Star, right? Now, we all know we need to walk towards the north, so we are walking. Interestingly, we cannot walk straight because we will be hitting with obstacle like mountains. At times, we'll be seeing something like a river, and we cannot walk straight. So we need to divert from north. The perspective here is that every time we take a diversion, we need to know how much we diverted and where we are originally planning to go. And that course correction is extremely important. Now, there are two different perspectives exist in any organization, like in a very simple way. So there is a developer's view and there is a business view. So the business view is something like a penthouse. They are sitting on the top of a tower and they're looking at the development teams and they feel like everything is possible, right? At the same time, if you ask a developer, you'll probably understand the ground level pains. And the interesting part that a persona like architect brings is something like this. He needs to take the elevator, stop wherever is needed, and support the team. So he becomes the bridge between all different layers exist from top to bottom. That brings to the next takeaway, be the bridge between business and the developers. Now, with this, I just want that all of us should try to make better and meaningful softwares with this principle, something that probably the world will be much more happier about. Think about the environment. And thank you for being such a lovely audience.